In this video, we're going to check out how to warp full tracks in Ableton Live. The material we're going to warp is electronic based, so we will take that into consideration when warping. Now throughout the series, we'll do a few different examples that'll cover a bunch of different situations that can arise when warping full songs. But before we get started, I just want to mention that the best way to get good at warping tracks is through experiences. The more tracks you warp, the better you're going to get. So just spend a bunch of time warping. It will be worth it in the long run. So Live is really good at warping short loops. So good, we almost don't even have to think about it. We just toss in a loop and it's automatically synced to the global tempo. But for full tracks, it's a little bit different. We need to give Live a little bit of help to get nice, tight warping. So the first thing we're going to do, and we only have to do it once, is go into Preferences, and I'm going to my Record Warp Launch tab, and I'm just going to make sure Auto Warp Long Samples is turned off. By turning this preference off, we're basically telling Live that when we drag in a full track, that we don't want Live to warp it. We're going to do it ourselves. This will save us a step or two in the warping process, so I definitely recommend following along and turning this preference off. So I think we're ready to go in and warp our first track. Track 1, or Case 1, is a track in which the main beat or main drum pattern starts off right at the beginning of the song. So I'm just going to bring in our first track. Okay, it's just creating the waveform here. And this song is a pretty easy one to start off with. Again, because the main drum pattern starts off right at the beginning of the track. I'm just going to hit play. And we can hear that we have standard house techno style drum pattern. And this pattern is representative of what's going to happen for the rest of the song. Like if I move forward in the song, I'll move my start marker forward. Alright, same drum pattern, move it even farther. Same 4 on the floor drum pattern. So again, right from the beginning, we have the drum pattern that is characteristic of the drums in the rest of the song. Sure, there's some other bits added in later on, but same basic pattern. Okay, so notice also that the warp switch is turned off, and that is thanks to the preference we turned off in the beginning of the video. I mentioned that we have to tell Live two things, or we have to help out Live to get a full song nice and tightly warped. So the two things we have to tell Live is, first we got to give Live an approximate tempo of the track. And the second thing we have to tell Live is where the track starts. I know that telling Live where the track starts seems a bit strange and weird, but you'll see that we don't always want Live to think that all songs start from the beginning of the file. And if we look at this particular track, the beginning of the file's here, but our drum beat starts right there. And drum beats are always the easiest thing to warp because they give us a definite sense of time throughout a track. So what we're going to do is, let's tap out our tempo. So I'm actually just going to map this tap tempo to the T key. So I go into map mode, tap the tap tempo button, hit T, and also the metronome. We'll check our warping against the metronome later on. So I'm going to click the metronome button, hit M, and jump out of MIDI map mode. So approximate tempo. So I'm going to play the track, tap along. Okay, so I tapped along and I got something like 127, and that's good enough. Remember, I said approximate is the key word here. Just needs to be ballpark. Next thing I want to do is tell Live where the track starts. Okay, so I want Live to think that the track starts right there, right up against that kick drum. Okay, so right at the beginning of the kick drum, at that transient, that burst of audio is where I want Live to think the track starts. And the last thing I have to do to finish telling Live that the song starts here is I have to right click that start marker and select set 1.1.1 here. So just to recap, telling Live where the track starts is a two-step process. First you put your start marker right up against that first kick drum, and then you right click that start marker and select set 1.1.1 here. Now after I do that, you'll notice a couple things. You'll notice that the warp switch is now turned on, and that we have warp markers in our track. Well, a couple warp markers. Okay, but the track isn't warped yet. I have to actually tell Live to now warp it. So to warp it, I can either right-click the warp marker, or I could right-click the start marker, and just select warp from here straight. And I've noticed, and other people have noticed as well, that warp from here straight works great for electronic material that is made by a sequencer, kind of rigid drum patterns. And I don't mean rigid as in not too much swing or vibe. I just mean that they're not going to drift off the way a human performance would throughout the course of a track. So anyway, our track is now warped, and if we just go in, we could kind of look at the beats. I know that is a kick drum right there, right on the downbeat of bar 4. I'll go right here. I notice again there's a kick drum right on the downbeat of bar 5, so on and so forth. So let's check it with the metronome. Alright, everything sounds pretty good. The only thing left to do is tighten up the warping at the end of the track. I notice when warping like this, the beats start slowly drifting off throughout the track. After the first few bars of the song, it's not a big deal. Much like a slow second hand on a clock won't make a big difference after a few minutes. But after a month, or in the case of warping, after 100 bars or so, the drift will have a big impact on the timing. And if we go to the end of the track, you can see right here that here's the beginning of bar 225, and here is our kick drum. And it's a little bit off. You can see it's a little bit early. Okay, so it's real simple to fix. So all we have to do to fix it is you'll notice we have this little transient marker right there. Okay, and notice if I hold the shift key, I could slide that transient marker around. See, now it's over there. I could hold the shift key, slide it over. Now it's there. So I'm just gonna hold the shift key, slide it again to the beginning of that kick drum, and then I'm just going to let go of the shift key and drag the transient handle and the audio over to the beginning of the bar. And notice I didn't add another warp marker. Right, I could just double click anywhere and make a new warp marker. And the reason I did that is because when you don't make a warp marker and you just drag a transient handle, Live readjusts the warping of the entire track. If we added in another warp marker, all it would do is adjust the timing between the previous warp marker and the new warp marker. So now that we have nice tight warping at the beginning and nice tight warping at the end, logic would tell me that we should have a tightly warped track in the middle as well. So I can just go to a random spot, beginning of bar 81, bam, kick drum is lined right up as well. Okay, a couple more things. Let's set our project tempo to the tempo of our warp track. So 124. Okay, so now this will play back at its proper tempo. The other thing we want to do is we just want to make sure that we're not, if we're in beats mode, we don't want to use transients mode. I'm not going to get into the merits of every different warping algorithm here. I just want you to be careful not to use transients mode for a full song. Once you start drifting away from the original tempo, it starts getting a bit wonky. And the last thing is to hit the save button. Okay, very important. What the save button does is it stores all the warp settings we just made into an analysis file, which you can see right here. And it puts that analysis file in the same directory as your MP3, your WAV file. Okay, don't delete these things. If you move your MP3 or WAV file, move the analysis file with it. If you don't, you're going to have to rewarp the track again. So that was case 1, warping a song that has drums with a kick drum from the beginning of the song. So that's it for this video, but before we end, let's do a quick recap. To warp a full song in Live, we have to help out Live by telling it 2 things. First, we have to give Live an approximate tempo for the track, which we can do by tapping the tempo along with the song. The second thing is to tell Live where the song starts. There are 2 steps to this one. First, place the start marker right up against the first kick drum in the track. Then right-click the start marker and choose Set 1.1.1 here. Then we're ready to warp. To warp, right-click the start marker again and choose Warp from Here Straight. Remember, Warp from Here Straight is really good for electronically generated material. And that's it. So thanks for checking this out. In the next video, we'll check out how to overcome some pitfalls that can arise when warping full tracks. Also,